The El Nino weather over the Pacific Ocean is likely to be the strongest in living memory. The Met Office is warning about the climate phenomenon pushing up global temperatures and increasing the risk of extreme weather. It means 2027 is very likely to be the hottest year on record around the world. Let's speak to meteorologist John Hammond. Morning, John.
Morning, Calum.
Right, help us understand what the El Nino is.
Well, Calum, it's part of an intricate and very complex dance which is perpetually taking place between the oceans and the atmosphere. Those are two very different fluids, and the sort of transfer of energy between one and the other is what makes up our weather around the globe. And its purpose really is to redistribute heat from the tropics to the poles to keep things nice and balanced. Well, every so often, and it is a sort of irregular cycle, but every so often what happens is you get a dome of heat developing across the depths of the tropical Pacific, and that emerges at the surface in what's called El Nino, and that affects the central and eastern parts of the tropical Pacific. Now, typically in El Nino, we'll see temperatures rise by up to a degree or so. This one is already reaching 2 degrees above the normal. That makes it a strong El Nino already, Calum. But as you say, the projections for this autumn are that it's going to get much, much stronger. The Met Office actually is one of the more conservative models. That's going for a 3-degree warming. Some models, are going for a warming of up to 4 degrees or even more. That would be unprecedented, which means the impacts of El Nino, the impacts of that warming across the tropical Pacific, will be disproportionately high around the globe. Now, there are various impacts. For example, it tends to cause drought conditions across parts of South America, particularly around Amazonia. It causes a lot of rain across the southwest of the USA. It subdues the monsoon across South Asia and more generally across Southeast Asia and Australasia. I'm afraid that heralds droughts later on this year. Its impacts further afield, for example, across the UK, are a little bit more tenuous, but there are some linkages, and there are some concerns about what that might mean for us as we go into the autumn and the winter.
Yeah. Whatever happened, John, to not forecasting the weather this far out? Is the El Nino this predictable?
Yeah, it is, and the computer models have been very confident about this one for several months now. You're right. In some ways, it's easier to predict some longer-term sort of global weather patterns than it is to predict what's it going to be like in Birmingham next Tuesday afternoon. That's one of the things about weather forecasting. The chaotic sort of interactions of these fluids, the atmosphere and the ocean, mean that some longer term patterns are easier to pinpoint. And this one, all the models are going for a very strong El Nino. As you say, it could well be the strongest for, up to 100 years. And if some of those computer models which are going for sort of a 5-degree warming, that would make it, the warmest or the strongest El Nino for centuries, if not millennia. So, watch this space. There are some known effects, which I've listed earlier on about, how it affects, drought and flooding in various parts of the globe. But given that this one is going to be so strong, there has to be a question mark about how reliable those previous events are going to be as a sort of footprint for what's going to happen this time.
John, it's so good to speak to you, and we will come back to it because already it's having an impact on the Panama Canal, which is having to reduce the number of ships going through it due to, it drying up a bit, basically. That's meteorologist John Hammond, friend of the programme, who we will speak to more about El Nino, I am sure. There has been the odd shower in some parts of the drought-stricken country. Will it be enough to revive your parched garden? Let's speak to Bunny Guinness, gardener and YouTuber. Hello, Bunny.
Hi, good morning.
It's good to speak to you. How do we measure whether we're getting enough rain, whether we need to top it up ourselves?
Well, I am very mean with my watering because we don't have any mains water. So you can imagine, you just think if I overwater, we might not have any to drink. So I tend to look at plants, and if they look slightly distressed, then I'll watch them, and then after a bit I'll give them some water. But I think when we water plants, we do it really badly. I mean, it sounds silly, you'd think it was easy, but actually they've done research with roses, and if you don't water them very often, their roots get much bigger and much stronger. When you give them little splashes now and again, then obviously the roots don't need to be big and beefy, and they sit at the surface, and they're no good in this sort of weather. So I think we just have to accept that blonde is the new green for lawns, and I wouldn't bother to water those. They'll come back, they'll bounce back pretty quickly. We had about 8 millimetres in the last couple of days, and they're starting to green up already. I am in the driest part of the country, and I'm on very, very dry soil. But I'm starting to change a lot what I grow. You know, I grow things like persimmons, pomegranates, figs, myrtles, germander, all those sort of things. And they've been thriving here for years. Roses have been doing amazingly well, particularly ones like Windflower and James L. Austin. They're still flowering now, and they're looking really, really lush. Peonies likewise. So, but things like my phloxes, which look rather shriveled and miserable, I'm just going to bin. I'm not going to bother to grow them next year, because they're saying, aren't they, that next year's going to be even hotter and drier.
This is the thing. It's I don't have much. Well, what we have is lots of potted plants and flowers in our garden, because there's lots of decking and blah blah blah. I find I'm not really sure of the science of what I should be doing with those at the moment, Bunny. I'm watering as much as I can, especially when the sun isn't baking them. So when it cools down a bit in the evening, is that the right approach to my potted plants?
Well, I've got over 100 pots.
Wow.
And I'm very time poor in the garden, and I have help one day a week, and I never water them at all, and that is because I cut the bases out of the pot. So what happens is you cut the base out, put them on. If it's in gravel, I'll put a bit of soil underneath the exact position of the base of the pot. If it's on paving, I'll cut a circle of paving out and put them on the paving, and then their roots go right down. And as long as you're not growing things that demand buckets of water, such as phlox, for instance, they will thrive. And you don't have to feed them either, because they seem to get enough feed from the soil like that, because their roots just go hunting. Now, if you're on decking, it's more difficult. I mean, we are doing a job on decking at the moment, and we are putting baseless pots on top of the decking and bringing soil up right underneath the decking, if you're with me.
Yeah, I get you.
And so the plants grow much bigger, much stronger. We're putting small trees in, and they'll stand on their own after about 3 months when the roots have got down. But I do think it's important that we plant a lot in these hot, dry summers. I mean, not exactly now, but this sort of September or whatever, because when you've got that lush green look with plants that want to be there in those conditions, it really moderates that sort of relentless heat and sun, and it really makes you feel cooler. And trees are brilliant at providing shade and moderating the climate, filtering winds, saving your heating bills, saving cooling in the summer. You know, the more we plant, the better, really. So please don't be put off by planting and growing.
Yeah, we're just going to have to adapt a little bit. Bunny, it's great to speak to you. Thank you so much. Bunny Guinness is a gardener and YouTuber. You can find her channel, Bunny Guinness, online.